Matt Zapotosky is the Department of Justice reporter for the Washington Post and joins us now. Matt, hey, thanks a million. It's good to talk to you. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me on.
So, listen, as long as you cover the Justice Department, and I think all Americans are in favor of justice, what do you think this book and the surrounding personalities, interviews, etc., have done for our view of the Justice Department and the FBI, or done to it?
Well, that's a really tough question. I think the main thing that this book drives at is what this has done for James Comey's reputation. And I think in the lead-in, you had a commenter on there saying, well, I was kind of disappointed, and there were some questions, that I have. And I think Comey's book is re-raising those. I don't think everyone has uniformly found his defenses of what he did convincing, and really comes after the president in no uncertain terms. But he has a lot of tough questions to answer himself, and I don't think the public is convinced that he answered those in a satisfactory way.
Right, and the fact that, and this has been pointed out by a lot of people, that he talked to Stephanopoulos for 5 hours, but in the same 1 hour portion that we all saw, he talked about how the FBI does not get into politics at all. I've never seen it come up. I've never heard anybody mention it. Then a little bit later says, because Hillary is so far ahead in the polls, I did X. Well, what the hell is that?
I've always been struck by that. And if you remember some months ago, the New York Times and ProPublica did sort of big takes on the Clinton email investigation. And there was a lower level FBI official who said the same thing. Well, we assumed Clinton was going to win, so that informed our decision making. And that's just not how it's supposed to work. I mean, you can't on one hand say we were above politics, we're not trying to favor any one person or the other, but oh, by the way, we assumed Clinton was going to win, and that was informing our decision making. That's the definition of politics.
Well, right, and the only way you would assume Hillary was going to win is because you're looking at the polls on a daily basis. I mean, what is that?
It's
just not the way it's supposed to work.
Right, indeed. So, Matt, to your mind, are there any... Well, how do I ask this? Are there any revelations in the book that are of great significance legally that will necessarily be historical?
Legally, in terms of the president, I don't think so. I mean, look, to me, the book and this interview gives us a lot of scenes that maybe we didn't have before, like a lot more detail about Jim Comey's interactions with the president and his personal impressions of the president. But I don't think it really gets to any explosive, newsy revelations that are going to affect the course of the Russia investigation. I mean, he pretty assiduously steers clear of that. And you can understand why a lot of this stuff is probably still classified. He offers his impression, but I don't think Bob Mueller or anyone is going to watch Comey's interview and say, aha, that's sort of the smoking gun that is going to propel the case forward. He just adds new detail, I think, to the public's understanding.
Well, and even, the question of obstruction of justice, I haven't seen or heard anything of any great significance there.
Yeah, he offers his assessment, which is that it's possible the president obstructed justice, and there's some evidence of that. But again, now this is just the assessment of one man who's outside of government and who clearly, from day one has seemed to have a distrust of President Trump. So I don't think that's going to move the case any one way or the other. Though it will be interesting for some people to hear Jim Comey, a respected law enforcement guy, say that there's evidence the president obstructed justice.
The headline, if there is one, is it's the headline in your piece today. Comey says Trump morally unfit to be president. A former FBI director saying that about the current president is, newsworthy. But Trey Gowdy said on Fox yesterday on the Fox show, well, would you have continued to work for this guy, or are you just telling us since you got fired? Were you going to go ahead and work for the morally unfit president if you'd have kept your job?
Well, yeah, and it's interesting. He says, I've looked at the whole sort of 5-hour transcript of this interview, and he says he would. He says he would have continued on. His being fired, he was removed involuntarily. It wasn't like he was eyeing the door. President Trump fired him in a very unexpected way. But, I do think that is the headline. This assessment is just stunning for the former FBI director to say that President Trump was morally unfit to be president. Now, he sort of quickly follows it up with saying he would not favor impeaching the president. He feels like that would kind of let American voters off the hook, and that American voters are kind of responsible for living with, I guess, what he sees as the consequences of their decision and doing something about it in a couple of years here. So, but that assessment I really think is important and interesting for people to hear.
Matt Zapotosky is the Department of Justice reporter for the Washington Post. You know, Matt, it strikes me because we don't come at this from a radical pro-Trump or anti-Trump position. We're just kind of curious guys, and we like to watch what's going on and get to the truth. I thought Donald Trump revealed himself pretty thoroughly during the campaign in terms of morals, ethics, personal manner, the tweeting thing, his willingness to punch below the belt. I felt like I had a pretty good picture of the guy, before Election Day, and I'll bet a lot of Americans have the same opinion.
Well, maybe that's what Comey is driving at, right? When he says he wouldn't favor impeaching him, this is something the American people have to consider. Now, he wasn't asked, that I recall, to address that question. Well, don't you think they have considered this? Don't you think they have considered the president's morals? I mean, it's only, a month before the election that the Access Hollywood tape came out. That gave you a kind of clear sense of the type of things that President Trump would say. He doesn't address that, but I wonder if that's what he is driving at with his statement about, look, I don't in favor of impeaching him over my perception that he's an immoral guy. This is a question for voters, but that he hopes voters will sort of agree with him.
Maybe I took in too much coverage of this over the weekend, but I have this feeling that this thing, this book came out really hot and everybody was really excited, but it's going to dissipate really quickly. I have a feeling by the time Comey does his third interview later today, the amount of attention paid to it is really going to wane.
I think the one thing he maybe risks, too, is people just growing a little sort of weary of his media tour. I mean, this is just the beginning. He's got interviews scheduled all this week and into May. He's doing one May 8th.
I think we've got him June 4th.
So, I would say this is just the beginning, and we'll have to see. I mean, he talked to George Stephanopoulos for 5 hours. There are still some questions I have for him, but there's going to come a point where it's like every question has probably been asked.
So where do you buy your shoes? I mean, you're running out of questions.
How long should a tie be, Mr. Director? So, listen, Matt, just an opinion question. I want to read this book just because I like hearing how things work and how those meetings go and where they meet and the process, the part of it we commoners don't see. But how do you think the book will be seen eventually? Is it going to be one of your great histories of a White House, or just kind of or less?
Yeah, I think that's the big question, right? So Comey clearly wrote it, I think, thinking that this would be a book that would have significance beyond just the next month. Of course, he's trying to sell books, but I think he wants this to have some import going forward and be sort of a tool book for somebody who's entering leadership in Washington maybe 40 years from now. But I think because of sort of the salacious details he reveals and the way he comes after President Trump, it is going to be hard for it to be viewed just as a kind of deep think piece. People are going to think of it as just sort of another Washington book of the moment, the what's hot right now. And I think the question is, can it grow beyond that, or will it have its moment in the next couple of months and then just fade away?
That's the way it feels to me, the Washington book of the moment. And a lot of it is because of the personal shots and stuff. It just sounds like he's, part of that whole game. I think that Trump, as usual, would have served himself better if he'd have just shut up over the weekend. If he hadn't called Comey lion slime ball or whatever he called him a couple of times, I think there'd have been about 2/3 the coverage that happened. So if he'd have just shut up about it, the thing would be gone by tomorrow.
It is sort of ironic.
If cows don't moo, if birds don't fly, please. It's in the man's nature. Matt Zapotosky, Department of Justice reporter for the Washington Post. Hey, Matt, we really appreciate the time. Well done. Thanks.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, it doesn't have the legs I thought it was going to have. I could be wrong, but
I'd like to read it. I think it's going to be a fun read. If you hate Trump, it's going to justify what you think or reinforce what you think. And there's so much eye of the beholder in all of this. Not just, is the guy morally unfit? From a certain point of view, yeah, I could see where you would think that, but it's in the eye of the beholder. There may be, quote unquote, I think he says there is some evidence of obstruction of justice, but not enough evidence. And again, it depends the eye of the beholder. And the Russia thing's going nowhere. There was no collusion. The pee-pee thing that Comey seems so enamored with talking about, that's nowhere. It's just, I don't know. It could be an interesting book. I haven't read it. But I like this. We got this note from JT in Livermore. Guys, I don't think there's a wife in the country who wouldn't have at least 1% doubt about their husband when the director of the FBI says there is intelligence materials alleging a husband interacted with hookers on a business trip. Call me with I'm a flawed man, but I know my wife wouldn't even have 1% suspicion. Well, what if the director of the FBI told her, yeah, we have a dossier saying he was getting with hookers in Moscow? Well, then maybe your wife would have 1%, you sanctimonious bastard.
I still don't get that whole thing. So none of the intelligence agencies have verified it. No news agency will print it because they think it would ruin their reputation.
Not websites.
Yet you hold it to the level of telling the president about it. I don't get it. So is there anything?
Taking it to the FISA court.
Is there anything you wouldn't tell the president? I mean, just some guy in the street said he thinks you're an alien. So I thought I'd let you know.
Mr. President, we thought it was important you hear that there are rumors of you being a space alien. 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 You being a space alien.